Could there have been a Victorian-era serial killer whose reign of terror surpassed even that of Jack the Ripper, targeting the most innocent and vulnerable victims? While Jack the Ripper is infamous for the murders of 5 women prostitutes, an English nurse named Amelia Dyer gained notoriety for committing hundreds of horrific murders of innocent babies, who were left in her care under the guise of baby farming over a 2-decade period. In Victorian England, baby farming emerged as a practice where impoverished single mothers would pay another woman to care for their illegitimate infants. This arrangement was born out of the stigma surrounding single parenthood and the lack of financial support from fathers due to the 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act, which completely relieved fathers of illegitimate children from any financial obligations, leaving mothers in desperate financial conditions. Baby farming was one of the options available to single mothers who couldn't afford to care for their children themselves. Unfortunately, unscrupulous individuals like Amelia Dyer exploited this unregulated system for profit, as formal adoption processes were not yet regulated at the time. Born on June 30, 1837, in the small village of Pile Marsh, just east of Bristol, Amelia Elizabeth Dyer was the youngest of 5 children born to Samuel and Sarah Hobley. She enjoyed a bright childhood with her father, an experienced shoemaker, providing financial stability and support to the family. Amelia was often described as exuding warmth and compassion, drawing others to her with ease, and appearing to be the epitome of a devoted caregiver. Unlike many of her peers in the Victorian era, Amelia was fortunate to receive an education, learning to read and write. Possessing above-average intelligence, she developed a passion for poetry and literature, receiving a higher education than was typical for the time. Unfortunately, the brightness of her early life dimmed when her mother succumbed to a fatal mental illness caused by typhus. As the youngest sibling, Amelia was tasked with caring for her ailing mother, who often suffered violent fits. Amidst this hardship, she endured the loss of her only sister, Sarah Ann, at the age of 6 in 1841. Tragedy struck again in 1845 when her younger sister, also named Sarah and in memory of the first, died just weeks after birth. After years of caring for her mother, Amelia experienced another devastating loss with her mother's death in 1848, likely shaping the course of her criminal life. Following her mother's death, Amelia left her family home to live with her aunt in Bristol, where she found employment as a lace corset maker. Her family suffered further with the loss of her father in 1859, shattering their relationships. After her father's death, Amelia's eldest brother Thomas assumed control of the family shoe business. 2 years later in 1861, at the age of 24, Amelia became permanently estranged from at least one of her brothers, and moved into lodgings on Trinity Street in Bristol. It was during this time that Amelia fell deeply in love with 59-year-old George Thomas, a man 35 years her senior. On their marriage certificate, both George and Amelia misrepresented their ages to lessen the age gap between them, with George subtracting 11 years from his age and Amelia adding 6 years to hers. Following their marriage, Amelia began nursing training, during which she met midwife Ellen Dane, who with her sinister reputation suggested an alternative means of earning money. Dane proposed that Amelia could capitalize on her home by offering lodging to young unmarried pregnant women, providing them with a discreet place to stay. Ellen assisted Dyer in every way, enabling her to start her baby farming enterprise. Similar to other baby farmers, Dyer offered accommodations to pregnant unmarried women, providing care until childbirth and then taking in their infants to be raised as nurse children. Fees for baby farming varied widely depending on the financial circumstances of the parents. Affluent families seeking confidentiality might pay up to £80, while impoverished mothers typically pay around £5. During this period, babies kept by baby farmers were often sedated with heavy drugs like alcohol and opiates, readily available near the door. One common product used for this purpose was Godfrey's cordial, colloquially known as Mother's Friend. This concoction contained ingredients such as opium, treacle, and water, and was marketed as a remedy for various infant ailments like teething pains and restlessness. However, the opium content in the cordial posed risks of respiratory depression, addiction, and even overdose, particularly in young and vulnerable patients. Despite these dangers, baby farmers often relied on such sedatives to keep babies quiet and manageable, allowing them to handle larger numbers of infants with minimal effort and without attracting attention. Mothers seeking to reclaim or inquire about their children entrusted to baby farmers often faced several hurdles. Some encountered difficulties locating their children or faced resistance from authorities while reporting missing illegitimate offspring. Furthermore, societal stigma surrounding illegitimate births and apprehension about involving law enforcement deterred some mothers from reporting potential mistreatment by baby farmers or the disappearance of their babies. As a result, many mothers hesitated to seek assistance or remained silent despite concerns about their children's well-being. After the birth of her daughter Ellen Thomas, and the death of her husband George in 1869, Amelia abandoned her nursing profession. Facing desperate financial circumstances, she turned to baby farming. However, she took this endeavor to a sinister extreme. Advertising herself in newspapers and magazines as a respected and married nurse, she offered safe shelter and care for newborn babies. By presenting herself as kind and caring in meetings with potential clients and in her advertisements, she quickly gained the trust of those seeking her services. Charging a one-time fee ranging from £10 to £80, depending on the financial status of the families, she also required adequate clothes for the babies. In 1872, Amelia married William Dyer, a brewer's laborer from Bristol, with whom she had 2 children, Mary Ann, also known as Polly, and William Samuel, yet even motherhood failed to soften Amelia's sinister inclinations. Initially, she didn't intend to kill the infants left in her care, but as she became more familiar with baby farming, she realized she could profit by letting the children die, pocketing the payment intended for their care. She began disposing of the infants either by starvation or a lethal overdose of opiate solutions intended to soothe them, and when deaths occurred, she would summon a coroner, feigning shock and grief over the loss. In 1879, authorities were alerted, and Amelia was eventually apprehended after a doctor became suspicious of the high number of child deaths associated with her. However, the Victorian courts, unaccustomed to the idea of a woman being responsible for numerous child deaths, sentenced her to only 6 months of hard labor in a work camp before releasing her. This experience deeply affected Amelia's mental health, exacerbating her derangement. Upon release, heavily dependent on alcohol and opium, she resumed her grisly baby farming business, now with a more horrendous approach. Changing her modus operandi, she began directly strangling the infants left in her care to retain the entire one-time payment given by their mothers, avoiding any expenditure on child care. Aware of the risks of involving coroners, she disposed of the bodies herself, wrapping them in clothes and burying them, throwing them into rivers, or concealing them throughout the town, varying her methods to avoid detection. In 1890, Amelia took custody of an illegitimate baby from a governess, and when the governess sought to reclaim or visit her child out of concern for its welfare, she grew suspicious of Dyer's actions. To confirm her suspicions, she stripped the baby to check for a birthmark, a potential identifying feature. However, no birthmark was found. Continued suspicions by the authorities eventually led to Dyer feigning mental breakdowns, contributing to her downfall. She often pretended to have mental health issues and even acted in a self-harming manner when it served her interests. With prior experience working as a nurse in mental hospitals and witnessing her mother's struggles with mental illness, Dyer knew how to convincingly portray such behaviors. This allowed her to evade detection and continue her criminal activities without facing consequences, manipulating the mental health system to her advantage and using it as a means to escape justice for her crimes. Amelia frequently relocated with her family to different towns and cities, allegedly adopting new identities with each move, presumably to avoid suspicion from authorities. In 1893, she had her final stay in an asylum, which differed from previous experiences as it was likely not positive or agreeable for her, possibly due to police suspicion surrounding her activities, and as a result, she allegedly decided against seeking admission to any other asylum in the future. She moved to Caversham, Berkshire, with her daughter Mary Ann and husband Arthur Palmer, accompanied by an associate named Jane Granny Smith. To appear more trustworthy to women giving up their children to her, she convinced Jane to pose as her mother, part of Dyer's strategy to create a facade of a caring family environment and gain the confidence of her clients. On March 30, 1896, Amelia's reign of terror nearly came to an end, when a bargeman discovered a heavily weighted suitcase in the River Thames in Reading. The suitcase contained the body of one of her recent victims, Helena Fry, wrapped in package wrapping paper. Detectives retrieved a label from Templemead Station, along with faintly legible names including Mrs. Thomas, one of Amelia's aliases, and an address. Despite limited evidence linking Amelia to the infant's murder, the police used other methods to catch the perpetrator. They placed an advertisement in the newspaper, posing as a mother seeking a nurse, and arranged a meeting with Amelia, who walked into a police ambush instead of meeting a real mother in need. On April 3, police raided Amelia's home, immediately struck by the smell of human decomposition. Though no bodies were found, they discovered various incriminating materials: white edging tape, telegrams discussing adoption arrangements, pawn tickets for children's clothing, receipts for advertisements, and letters from mothers inquiring about their children. Additionally, belongings were packed as if Amelia were preparing to move, likely to Somerset. Further inspection led the police to calculate that in the past few months alone, Amelia had been entrusted with the care of 20 children. On April 4, she was arrested and charged with murder, and 6 more bodies were discovered, including Doris Marmon and Harry Simmons, Dyer's last victims, each strangled with white tape. Doris Marmon, the illegitimate daughter of a barmaid named Evelina Marmon, sought adoption offers in January 1896. Responding to an advertisement from Mrs. Harding, Evelina Marmon agreed to pay £10 upfront for her daughter's care. Dyer, posing as Mrs. Harding, took Doris to London, where her daughter Polly resided. There, possibly with Polly's assistance, she strangled Doris with white edging tape, a method Dyer enjoyed watching for the slow suffocation it caused. They disposed of Doris' body in a carpet bag weighted with bricks, then killed another child, Harry Simmons, the following day using the same method. Both babies' bodies were disposed of in the River Thames near Caversham Lock. During her arrest, she admitted, "I used to like to watch them with the tape around their neck, but it was soon all over with them." While in a cell at Reading Jail, Amelia penned a letter on April 16, 1896, asserting her independence from the crimes and exonerating her daughter and son-in-law, who had been apprehended alongside her. They were subsequently released without charges. During her trial, Dyer claimed insanity as her defense, citing her numerous asylum stays. Though she had been committed to asylums in Bristol before, the prosecution argued that these stays were merely tactics to evade suspicion. They asserted that each time Dyer feared her crimes might be uncovered, she feigned mental instability and sought asylum admission. Despite the evidence, it took the jury only 4.5 minutes to find her guilty, and she was immediately sentenced to death. In her 3 weeks in the condemned cell, she wrote 5 exercise books containing her confessions, and the night before her execution, she was visited by the chaplain, who asked if she had anything to confess, to which she responded by offering him her exercise books, saying, "Isn't this enough?" On Wednesday, June 10, 1896, the horrific reign of 57-year-old Amelia Dyer came to an end as she was hanged at exactly 9 a.m. at Newgate Prison. Despite confessing to only 1 murder, and the discovery of only 6 bodies, estimates suggest that over a span of more than 2 decades, Dyer was responsible for the deaths of over 400 children, profiting from each tragic demise. Following her execution, she became known as the Ogress of Reading, and her case prompted significant developments in the regulation of adoption and childcare services. The government introduced stricter regulations and oversight to prevent similar atrocities from occurring in the future. This included licensing and monitoring of foster care and adoption agencies, background checks for carers, and increased scrutiny of individuals involved in childcare professions, all in response to Amelia Dyer's chilling legacy.